Hello, I hope this day finds you well. I'm so glad that you are here, whether you're tuning in through Facebook or through YouTube, or maybe you're even one of those who joins us for our weekly Zoom meetings, which are a bit more intimate as we can share in conversation with one another and also take communion and talk about one another's lives. But before we dive into today's message, I want to say a few things. Um, we are thrilled that we are growing online in this way, and our impact has broadened whilst we've been pushed out of our sanctuary and into these digital spaces. But as you might expect, our our expenses, not only for things like overhead, church upkeep, maintenance of grounds and stuff like that, and salaries and the things that you'd expect, those have remained, but also we have continued ministering here in the community. Most specifically, I would like to give a shout out to our food pantry, which after having to take a few weeks hiatus when we had some contact with some people who had contracted COVID, we were able to get back in operation as a curbside service. And every Saturday we have 20 to 30 families come and collect food from our church, and we purchase the food from gleaners. And this has been one way that we've been able to have a continued impact beyond these digital spaces, but in actual flesh and blood, in a very safe and cautious way. Masks on, curbside pickup only. So we have a method that we feel is very good and very efficient. And I might add as an aside, if you would like to volunteer for that, please contact us at the information that will follow here in a little bit. But as I was saying, we still have upkeep and expenses. And we also want to be here for the long haul. We hope that Northwood has a long future serving and thriving in this community. So if you have been enjoying our ministries as they have been extended online and are wanting to know how you can support financially, I will tell you really two ways. One is our online app. We work through Givelify. It's an app that you can look up on your phone and download, or you can access the website, and you are able to give to nonprofits that way. And you just need to look up Northwood Christian Church, and you will be able to give with a very small service charge, I might add. But it's what I use, and I seem to like it just fine. But also, you can contact us directly and ask us how you might make a donation. We'll include our office administrator's email just below, and also the phone number to the office, and also the address to the church. And I'll leave that up for a few seconds so that you can reach out to us directly. And it doesn't have to be about contributing financially. Perhaps you just like to know more about Northwood, our history, who we are, and where we hope that we are going. And so if you'd like to get to know us better, please reach out. So enough of that. Let's move on to today's message. Today's text is found in the Gospel of Matthew, chapter 14, verses 22 through 33. And it goes, "Immediately he made the disciples get into the boat and go on ahead to the other side, while he dismissed the crowds. And after he had dismissed the crowds, he went up the mountain by himself to pray. When evening came, he was there alone. But by this time, the boat, battered by the waves, was far from the land, for the wind was against them. And early in the morning, he came walking toward them on the sea. But when the disciples saw him walking on the sea, they were terrified, saying, 'It is a ghost!' And they cried out in fear. But immediately Jesus spoke to them and said, 'Take heart, it is I. Do not be afraid.' Peter answered him, 'Lord, if it is you, command me to come to you on the water.' He said, 'Come.' So Peter got out of the boat, started walking on the water, and came toward Jesus. But when he noticed the strong wind, he became frightened, and beginning to sink, he cried out, 'Lord, save me.' Jesus immediately reached out his hand and caught him, saying to him, 'You of little faith, why did you doubt?' When they got into the boat, the wind ceased, and those in the boat worshipped him, saying, 'Truly, you are the Son of God.'" You know, in sorting out the logistics of the thing, I think we completely missed the point. I can remember a conversation that I had with a friend about the plausibility of walking on water and whether or not stories like this could even be possible. Because we had just watched a TV special by a illusionist magician that was popular when we were younger, named Chris Angel. You might have seen this, where he, in a seemingly public pool, there were people swimming around, walked out in front of everybody across the pool, to the amazement and astonishment of everybody. And we ourselves, as television viewers, were absolutely dumbfounded. And my friend I was arguing with was coming out of faith as I was trying to double down on faith. And so this was a conversation in which it seemed like a lot was on the line. And as an aside, I should say, I later learned how the trick was done. Apparently, there's a translucent plastic bridge just underneath the surface of the water that you can't see from above the water, and that's how it happens, and he walks on that. But again, in sorting out the logistics, I feel like we miss the point. You don't have to pin down the plausibility to get the point of this story. You have to understand, as a leaping off point, what the storm and the sea meant to people at Jesus' time. The waters signified chaos. The Hebrews were never a seafaring people going out in boats in a big and major way, especially when it came to combat and expansion. They stayed away from the ocean by and large, maybe fished lakes or nets by the seashore. But they saw the waters as this mysterious and uncontrollable force, evidence that there are places where God's providence and maintenance seem less certain. What you want to know when you are out at sea in a dark storm is if the night will end or if the waters will ever calm. Better still, one wonders if there might be some solid ground somewhere for you to plant your feet upon. Stormy seas are terrible places to be, but also a regrettable metaphor for life. I wished it weren't so, but it's true. For those times when our world feels turned upside down, a stormy sea, a storm at sea, seems a fit metaphor for that time. Those times when we're disoriented, without direction. So I guess I'm naming our own current circumstance. The summer of 2020, during this pandemic. I'm preaching this in somewhere between the first and second weeks of the month of August. And this pandemic has caused social upheavals that have left us feeling as though there is a lot that is outside of our control. And this is unnerving. At least it's unnerving to me. Are you with me? I think that many of us feel disoriented. And the disciples in the story had enough to be getting on with. And then this. They were just following Jesus' directive. He had just commanded them to do something that was very implausible. Feed a multitude of people with just 5 loaves and 2 fish. And then Jesus tells them to meet me on the other side of the lake. And so they, yes, sir, and they go. And following the orders of the one they called Lord, the one they called teacher, got them in this mess in the first place. Now, just as an aside, maybe this means that our calling as disciples lead us into unsafe places. But enough of that for now. It seems that Jesus simply needed time to process the death of his cousin and his friend John the Baptist. So what a mess. And is this what the disciples get for following Jesus? I thought that he leads us to life, but in this story, he leads disciples into the teeth of the storm, straight into the chaos and all that is found there. Most unfortunate for the disciples. Then the text reads that this is very early in the morning. And some translations say that it was in the 4th watch of the night. And this is the darkest part of the night, somewhere between 3 and 4 a.m. It's that time when daylight, sunshine, bright, new life, holy life seems a world away. Dark times disorient you. You want to see where it is you're headed. Clouds in times of storm and darkness distort your vision, leaving you feeling unmoored from reality, from time. Time ranges from standing still, I've found in these moments, to hardly mattering at all in times of storm and darkness. And the storm and the disorientation stretch out in seeming infinitude. So this is where the disciples find themselves. And then they look up after presumably hours of fighting and hours of fear. And they see Jesus walking on the water, treading lightly across the chaos, the pandemonium, master of himself and of the situation. They cannot believe their eyes. Can you blame them? You would not believe your eyes. Have you ever tried to calm someone down during a storm? They can hardly believe the words to be true. It'll be okay. This won't last forever, whether I'm trying to comfort my dog during a display of fireworks during the 4th of July, or whether or not I'm trying to comfort my children or my wife or a friend, or I'm trying to receive comfort and somebody is telling me it's okay, this won't last forever. Trust me, I can feel the solid ground forming under our feet. No, not true, you want to say. No, not true, says the person you are trying to reach, the person who is enthralled, captivated, undone by the calamity. But there is Jesus, walking on the waters, in defiance of the worst the natural world can throw at them, steady gait presumably, striding towards them atop of, in spite of, and in control of the chaos. When someone like this tells you that you do not need to be afraid, for once, I'm inclined to believe them. And sure enough, Peter believes him, or is at least trying to. Sometimes it's the best you can do, try to find the faith in the storm. He says, Lord, if it's you, order me to come to you on the water. And Jesus says, come. Now, much has been made of Peter stepping out of the boat, which is absolutely fitting. It is quite a striking image, and it's quite a brave thing for him to do. And notice that he was able to take a few steps. And many hone in on that and say, look, he was at least able to take a few steps. Congratulations are in order. I mean, I couldn't have done it. Could you? But his detractors point out that the situation overwhelmed Peter in the end. The storm wrested back his attention, and he became afraid. Fear will cast a cloud over your vision in any case. Attending to it will waste your energies. It can pull your attention away from what you ought to be focusing on, and then we in life begin to sink. I've experienced it dozens of times. Have you ever endured a season in your life in which fear immobilized you for a time, kept you in stasis, or kept you from engaging a problem? I talked to a friend this week who finds themselves in exactly this circumstance. So I don't know if we should be so hard on Peter. As I alluded to earlier, I don't think that I would have made it that far. And who can blame him, really? Who can blame him for being afraid? These commandments to fear not are very hard words to hear, because fear is something that keeps us stuck. And here is still another moment where we are sorely tempted to miss out on the point, which is this. Whether you should blame Peter for losing faith in the moment, or whether you should laud him for taking a few steps, the main point is he did step out of the boat, but more importantly, he did not drown. He left the boat in a storm and stayed alive. Jesus called him out, and he called on Jesus to save him. And he is rescued. And he learns that the God he sees in Jesus is reliable and trustworthy. I'd wager that Jesus would have helped his friend out in any case, sink or swim. I think Jesus would have helped him out in any case. But the cry for help indicates trust and faith. in the God Peter sees in Jesus. So when you've mustered up the courage and subdued your pride enough to ask for help yourself, didn't you find it liberating when you could finally muster up the courage to ask for the help you desperately need? And if you have not experienced this, maybe it's time you cried out for stronger arms to hold you and to help you. I think the reason that we're so hard on Peter for sinking in this story is because of Jesus' response once he's made his rescue. Jesus calls Peter a man of little faith. But before we move on, I should note that later in the 17th chapter of Matthew, Jesus says that a little faith, the size of a mustard seed, is all you need. You know, it moves mountains and all that. So I'm not sure that in naming Peter's little faith that we should infer an insult or a slight. Sometimes, probably usually, it is enough. But the question that follows certainly is meant to chide Peter at least a little bit. Jesus follows with, why did you begin to have doubts? Verse 31. And I want to reply for him at this point. I want to, one of those conversations where you step in and defend your friend. I want to say, well, duh. Did you see the waves? Did you taste the water? We've been in here for hours. Now we're standing on the water. I left the boat, which is only the place where I found safety. It was the last remnant of safety that I had, and you wonder why I doubt. And here's where we must put this story into a broader context. For you see, Peter has walked here before. Really, he's walked on the Sea of Galilee before. Well, maybe not him specifically, and maybe not the Sea of Galilee specifically, but Peter comes after a long line. Peter is the most recent generation in a long line of persons lost at sea. Sometimes literally, but certainly metaphorically. And Peter would have been aware of the other stories in the scriptures where God walked over, hovered over, took charge of the waters that are chaos and tragedy in the beginning. Genesis 1, we read, in the beginning, God hovered over the waters and called chaos into creative and beautiful order and symmetry. And when Noah was alone with his family at sea, God remembered him and blew God's breath on the waters, that same creative potential on the waters, bringing an end to the chaotic undoing, thus ushering in a new era of creative potential. And the Hebrews were led out of Egypt through the waters and found safety on the other side. I'd like to pause for a moment and remember Job who lost it all. And I mean his all, his life, his loves turned to dust. I mean that quite literally. He lost his children, his livestock, his very skin turned to boils. And in the face of this, he has this long battle with God where sometimes the despair seems to capture him. Sometimes he's mad and sometimes he's joyous. But in that book, we find these little pockets where Job, in spite of it all, marvels at the God who controls the chaos, or who stays constant in spite of the chaos. In Job 9, verses 7 through 8, we read, "Who commands the sun, and it does not rise, even seals up the stars, stretched out the heavens alone, and trod on the waves of the sea." Peter's mind goes straight to passages like this when he sees Jesus walking on the waters. And later, by God's power, God stilled the sea, Job 26. And even Isaiah gets in on the action in writing, "The Lord says, who makes a way in the sea and a path in the mighty waters?" It's a rhetorical question, really, because the God who called all into being has answered again and again, "It is I." So Peter, the most recent to find himself in this place, the same place his ancestors had found themselves, answers, "O Lord, my God." And in so doing, Peter recognizes that this is but the most recent retelling of an old story, an old story that tells what happens in the storms of life. God finds us in the middle and sees us through. Sometimes this means we find strength when we thought we had none. Sometimes this means we find the ability to face our fears even if our circumstance doesn't shift at all or very much. Sometimes this means that we hold on for life's sake, afraid we'll lose our grips in the darkness, only to discover we made it to the other side. This making it is itself a gift from God. All life and the living is a gift to us and to itself. Turns out, Peter had walked on these waters before, or if not him, those who came before, those on whose shoulders he sits. Theirs is a testimony to God's steadiness in the storms of life, God's constancy even unto death. God walks the waters with us. We cry for help and find help in unexpected ways and places, and by means of unexpected people with surprising stories. Maybe Peter should never have missed his step as he walked in the waters that so many had managed in generations past. But even if he sinks a bit, he's in good company. So let's now leap through the centuries to the present. Because is this not a storm? I'll remind us today, we've walked here before. True, the context is different, and the waves are a different color, and the sky is a different hue. All times are unprecedented. But I have to agree with Mark Twain on this one when he said, history doesn't repeat itself, but it often rhymes. And if it does rhyme, let's attend to the rhythms of the past. We are here because others made it. We are here because others found the faith to walk the waters in the storm. Waters a lot like these, if not these very waters. We are here because others cried for and found help when they needed it. We are here because God is faithful. Sometimes it does to borrow another's words when another says it best. So I'd like to quote John Newton's classic Amazing Grace. Through many dangers, toils, and snares, I have already come. 'Tis grace that brought me safe thus far, and grace will lead me home. May the God we see revealed in Jesus bring us safe across these waters. We've walked here before, and let's face it, we will likely walk here again. But God walks with us and will see us through to the other side of whatever storm.